Hello, everyone. Here we are again, Michael, Cam, and Anurag, and we are now going to be discussing episode 47 and 48 of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And we have just concluded the grand finale of Vervaeke's insights on relevance realization and so forth. And now we are beginning to look at what he calls the prophets of crisis of meaning, the philosophers who were able to indicate the coming of this crisis and were significant influencers to both in forewarning us as well as interpreting the crisis that we are living through. That's our goal today. And with that, I open the floor and invite Cam and Michael for opening thoughts and teeing us up for this conversation.
Thanks, Anurag. Yeah, the thing that I would add there, you teed it up beautifully. The way that I understood the presentation of these fellows, so Heidegger, Corbin, um, Jung, Tillich, and Barfield, as
Yep.
as also starting to provide the response to the crisis. So they're prophetically saying, "Here's what's coming," and they're starting to describe the practices.
Indeed.
Yep.
Michael, anything before I read the intro?
Just said that these two are some of my favorite chapters that we ever read. I mean, it's
Agreed.
I was just like, especially 48. Well, both, but 48, I kind of experienced kind of when you get that sort of spiritual tingle when someone's talking about something. I was like, oh, wait a minute. Wow,
Yeah.
this is really deep, and I can relate to it on a kind of non-linear level. Like there was something going, and that was neat.
Yep.
I get
Yep.
that a lot with McGilchrist and
Yep.
his big book. That happened to be constantly, and it was just like one after another. But it was great to have it here, and it was very welcome. I was like, yes.
Yeah, that's lovely.
So I'm glad.
Okay,
So,
so without further ado, so the recap of episode 48, I'm reading from the opening paragraphs of episode 48. So in episode 47, we were trying to understand Heidegger's work as a prophet in the Old Testament sense of the meaning crisis. We took a look at this notion of the thing beyond itself and realness as simultaneously the shining into our framing and the withdrawing beyond our framing in a deeply inter-affording, interpenetrating manner. We took a look at this deeper notion of truth, not truth as correctness, but truth as aletheia. Aletheia? That which grounds the agent-arena relationship in attunement and allows us the potential to remember being by getting into an attunement with its simultaneous disclosure and withdrawal. But we can forget that. We can get into a profound kind of modal confusion. And this is the history of metaphysics as the emergence of nihilism. We can forget the being mode. We can get trapped into the having mode, in which the metaphysics is a propositional project of trying to just use truth as correctness. And we misunderstand being as a particular being. We try to capture the unlimitedness aspect of being, but we only do it at the limit, which Heidegger is deeply critical of. And so we understand being in terms of a supreme being, a being at the limit and beyond the limit. This is on theology. We understand God as the supreme being, and this is deeply enmeshed for Heidegger with nihilism. Because this ontotheology, this theological way, at least a version of theology from classical traditional theism, this way of understanding being gets us into the deep forgetfulness and the modal confusion that is the hallmark of nihilism. But of course, we could perhaps remember the being mode. And this is what Corbin, following Heidegger, talks about as gnosis. We can understand what this gnosis is. What does it look like? What would it be like to remember from the being mode through aletheia, being? So I want to pick up on this idea of gnosis' serious play in a particular piece of work by Heidegger. Heidegger discusses, and Avens discusses in his book, and Caputo also discusses this in his excellent book, The Mystical Element in Heidegger's Thought. So I think, is that enough to go on?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's a good tee up.
Okay.
Now, I want a little help with part of this because I didn't quite get it. Is
Okay.
how the ontotheology is leading to nihilism. Did you guys grasp that? I'd be interested in your.
Yeah. I think to get to that, you have to kind of step through the premises he's laying out before that. And particularly what I found interesting might be how he builds a logic of Heidegger, how Heidegger builds a criticism. And then I think ontotheology is the last brick of the criticism as he lays it out, as I see it. You want me to take a
Interesting.
stab at it? What do you think?
Yeah, I did look it up, but it's one of those things that didn't stick in my head very well
Yeah.
for some reason.
So let
And,
me kind of summarize the way I understood it in like 4 or 5 bricks, and then perhaps have you guys respond and see whether your understanding is similar to mine, and we can talk about that.
Okay, that sounds good.
I saw it as like the first criticism is like, this having versus being mode. Like if we are describing everything as having mode, then even God and the truth can be an object, right? Therefore, God is a set of propositions that you believe in, like somebody, and
Right.
truth is set of propositions you believe in and corresponds to some static view of reality. That's why what's called correspondence view of truth, right? So truth is an object that you're pursuing. God is an object in the having mode, and having mode is all about set of propositions that you can contest, as is the truth. And what I saw him saying is that that's so contrasting to the being mode of just experiencing that and the participatory way that if you just pursue the propositional way of having mode, you're going to end up with nihilism because it's not going to give you grounding, because you will miss out so much of the genuine reality. And what he calls ontotheology is this mistake of trying to say that the God is the ontologic, the ground of being is some object or God or
Right.
something. Whereas what he's saying is it is concealment and revelation, concealment and revelation. And his view of truth is that truth is not an object to be acquired or propositions to be contested. It is something gets revealed and then concealed. And behind that is a level of concealment. And that opens up, and it's an infinite revelation and concealment that happens. And that's
isn't
kind
it
of how he turns it all around. And then he says, basically, you have to then, if you believe that's the ground, that's the being, then being is a state of constantly discovering this interplay rather than connecting yourself to just, a proposition. This is a dynamic coupling that never quite, there is no end to it and no beginning to it, just kind of keeps revealing itself. And that's very interesting. And that's how he talks about modernity as forgetting this grounding and the coupling. And it's all about the being. And because we forget this experience, firsthand experience of grounding and coupling, we are lost. We're lost with
that
his view.
that's very well done, Anurag, because it's interesting is that explanation I read in McGilchrist
Yeah.
and Peterson's new book, right? So this is, and then it's also reflected in the Tao, which he talks about later, right? So, and it's such a profound thing because it just feels right to me, like it's the whole thing. And this is part of how Peterson, when people say, "Do you believe in God?" He's like, "I don't want to answer that question, so I don't like how it's phrased." And people get all twisted about because they want him to say, "Yes, I believe in that object." I think that's what he's complaining about, rather than the mode of being, that is demanded from you if you truly are, quote, believing in, right? He's like, it's not a belief, it's a mode of being that you're saying you are. And he goes, and if you really say you are that, then you have a lot of responsibility, because in his mind, that means that you would never violate the laws of that being mode. And of course, we all do that all the time. So it's like, it's kind of disingenuous in his mind to say that, because he says that, there's a big, but also McGilchrist talks about the encounter and the co-creative rhythm of us and God in creation. So it's not, it also takes it away from God is, I think in his mind, the right brain to us, the left brain. This is how I see it now. And then that is modeled within us, just kind of, that's what do you say, how in the golden ratio, the smallest part is related to the largest part because of how it grows and expands in a certain ratio. And I think that's the same thing with, you say, the God mind in us. We reflect that in our way of being, in our structure. But I would say that, this is, I think, why Christians say that you have to be humble to God's will, because that's like our right brain, our ultimate right brain is God. This is how I see it. We're the emissary, right? But then we reflect that within ourselves as well, so it's that because we're kind of down the spiral, so to speak. Did that make any sense? I hope I didn't get too crazy on you guys, but that really hits home. And I think that Vervaeke really, he dug deep for this, and I'm grateful to have reached this place with you guys, because that's what I want. I want to remember, and I want to be in that being mode more, more often. So, yeah. What about you,
Yeah,
Cam?
not much to add there, but there's two phrases or two lines in the reading here that I went through that speak to this in particular. The first is, so we understand being in terms of us. Oh, excuse me, I picked the wrong one. We took a look at this deeper notion of truth. Not truth as correctness. So early on in the episode, I think he reinvokes the Philea Nicaea compared to Philea Sophia.
Yeah.
So the propositional tends to that mode of absolute, to the supreme. The series of propositions that will win the argument. So the love of victory. So that requires the supreme.
Yes.
Compared to the Philea Sophia, which is that process of discovery, that process of eternal discovery. You're both receding and penetrating. You're both coming at me, and there's part of you that's going away, and the same is happening here, and we're together in that. So that is the
Mm-hmm.
that is that which grounds the agent arena relationship in attunement and allows the potential to remember being, which is where you just ended your comments, Michael. I want to be in that mode where I am afforded the opportunity to remember, literally reinstantiate that sense of being in my own body, my own members, remember.
Yep.
I think I covered it. I kind of did. I kind of get it out of order there, but the two pieces were the necessity
I
of
think you
the
did a good job.
supreme.
It was a good thing to go back to. I mean, because that's exactly like, and this is interesting because I've seen Peterson, McGilchrist, and Vervaeke, and some other people. I forget the guy's name. He's not a British guy. And one thing that Vervaeke explained, not Vervaeke, I'm sorry. One thing that McGilchrist explains is that the original scientific discourse was the goal of sharing your insight with others so they could kind of explore with you to help you discover if you made errors or not and improve it, not to prove yourself right. That wasn't what it's about. And if you think about this, I can really relate to this in my own life, where sometimes you're with someone and you kind of explore ideas with them, and it kind of then you leave feeling this sort of filled, lighter feeling, or it's kind of this filled up feeling. And then when you're in some sort of combat with someone, or maybe that's all they offer, it's exhausting. I mean, it's like, because they're going to prove you wrong or just prove themselves right generally.
Yeah.
And it's like, God, I mean, what a horrible feeling. And that, I feel that the majority of social media is in the proving I'm right mode,
Yeah.
which it's just, no wonder people feel so horrible on there all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I do. So that's why, because they're not exploring ideas, they're not co-creating, they're just trying to prove themselves right. And it's, it's just talk about nihilism, right? So
So,
anyway.
what this episode, this particular, first of all, what I liked about this is that uh, I've never read Heidegger originally or anything other
Neither.
than this episode, what was my first exposure to Heidegger. What I liked was that he is doing such a major pivot from entire propositional way of knowing to basically saying the first-hand lived experience of mystery, that your lived experience tells you that there is no object to be had. Like when you seek something, you know that you will have an aha and you will have an insight, and that'll open another door. And then you will have another insight, another view that'll open another door. And that eternal concealment and revelation, that's a beautiful metaphor. And because that's the first person experience versus the abstraction of mathematical objects and theories and propositions. And what really hit me, besides resonating with work of McGilchrist and others, is that I was listening to a podcast episode of Vervaeke with this guy called Evan Thompson, a philosopher. And as chance would have it, this book called The Blind Spot, right? I started
Heard of
reading,
that. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The Blind Spot.
I've heard of it before.
Yeah.
What,
So this I discovered through Vervaeke's interview with this philosopher, Evan Thompson, and then this it's written by three authors. One of them is a physicist called Adam Frank, and Adam Frank recently had a fantastic 1 hour, 2 hours almost interview with Lex Friedman. What's interesting about that is that he talks. He's a cosmologist, physicist, hardcore. He talks about all of the physics stuff, but the last 20 minutes of that episode is worth listening to because here he's one of the co-authors of Blind Spot, and the central thesis of Blind Spot is what Heidegger is saying, that we have lost our way, and the reason why science is now kind of untethered because science is at the edge, not able to reconcile the first person experience, which is what McGilchrist and others are saying. So it's an interesting attack, and it's a recognition of the. If we were to rephrase what Heidegger is saying, he would say the blind spot is the fact that we have forgotten the being mode, right? And this whole book does a fantastic job. And what I thought about this is that it's written by hardcore physicists and scientists, right? And what they're doing is there's no woo-woo here. They're trying to say this is the reason why the edge of science in biology and physics and psychology and like in neuroscience, etc. All of these are hitting up against ontological assumptions, ground assumptions, and those ground assumptions have to include us, first person, our lived experience, and that's a blind spot. Not having that perspective, I would highly recommend it.
Thank you for. I've heard of it. I can't remember. What did I think? Maybe I even heard that guy talk to someone else besides Lex. But I just remembered something because I had this conversation with ChatGPT. Have you guys tried advanced voice yet?
No.
Oh God, you got to try it. It's crazy. You can talk to ChatGPT and you can dialogue with it. And anyway, so I sorted something out about Heidegger and all this stuff with chat, which is part of what I think Vervaeke's saying, and this is also what Peterson is saying in the new book, and also McGilchrist, is that one of the mistakes people are making is that you can't just be in the being mode all the time. You have to have a dynamic rhythm between having and being, having and being. And that's actually what Peterson is talking about, wrestling with God. So God would be the being mode, but we have to live in the world, right? And you have to have this sort of dynamic balance that is constantly being, I mean, it's hard to do, right? Because if you be too much, then maybe you don't pay your bills. If you have too much, then you're far from, you go too far from what's right. And trying to find that is the struggle. Like, and that's that's the wrestling part.
I would say game. Trying to
Yeah,
find
that's a
that
good
is
way.
the
Yeah.
game.
And the other thing that's incredibly parallel to my studies in neuroscience about trauma and regulation is that, contrary to what especially people who are traumatized believe, what's broken in them, or they don't want to use that word, but what's out of balance with them is not that is this dynamic flow between states. So you want to go to a place of safety and ease and then be challenged, and then go into states of survival to some degree to hopefully to overcome it, and then you go back. And so what's missing is the flow. And when I was getting better, I thought that what I needed was to feel safe and settled always and never, ever, ever feel bad. And it's like, and when I read the neuroscience, I was like, oh, wait a minute. That is actually a mistake, because what that is mania. So if you're always happy no matter what, that's called manic, and it's extremely destructive because you don't pay attention to any signals that tell you you're off base. You're just like, I'm always happy no matter what. And then you go spend all your money and go off to crazy adventures that don't work out, and then everything falls apart. So, and that's the extremes. If you have that manic depressive, right? You go, oh, I'm wonderful, wonderful. And then, oh my God, everything sucks. But there's no dynamic flow. And that is the key. So it's interesting for me to see how this philosophical stuff is just not in any conflict whatsoever with the neuroscience that I'm studying about how the nervous system optimizes, right? So that's really reassuring to me.
Yeah.
Well, I
We're
also really
rediscovering what
appreciate
we
how
lost.
McGilchrist makes the point of the asymmetry. So
Me too.
it's not a perfect balance of having a being.
And nothing is. I mean, this is even, I mean, as unpopular as it for me to say, even men and women, the relationship, it's not symmetrical. And that's not to say that one is better, right? That's not the point, but it's not symmetrical. The equal is actually not true. I don't mean that we are unequal in value or contribution, but we do not have equal contribution to the relationship, because we have different ways we show up, and that is then complemented, right? So that would be a better word, complemented,
Complementary. Yep.
but not equal, because
Yep.
that's
Yep.
not how it works,
Yeah.
right?
Certainly not identical. So,
Right. Thank you. That's a better word. Identical, equal, and identical. It's like, no, that's really not how it works. And I think that goes in all kinds of dynamics in life too.
yeah.
So we're about halfway through time. I know you needed to wrap a little bit early today, Anurag. How do you feel about moving on?
I think we should, if you're
I think we
okay with
should
it,
charge forward. Yeah,
try Corbin and the Divine Double.
Okay. So this is episode 48. So this is the recap of 48 from the beginning of 49. So in 48, we followed Heidegger into the depths where we encountered Eckhart and this non-teleological relationship to the play of being. That led us very directly into Corbin. And Corbin's core argument that gnosis, as the way we've been using it, the ability to engage in this serious play, relates centrally to the imagination. But Corbin is making use of this term in a new way. He makes a distinction between the imaginary, which is how we typically use the word imagination, mental images in my head that are only subjective and have no objective reality, and the imaginal. The imaginal, which mediates between the abstract, intelligible world and the concrete, sensible world, and transjectively mediates between the subjective and the objective. And that is not done statically. All of this mediation and mutual affordance is done in an ongoing transformative transframing, and that symbol captures all of this. And then I wanted to bring out Corbin's core symbol, and it's a core symbol that relates directly to gnosis, because in gnosis, in this transformative participatory knowing, and this goes to the core of Heidegger's notion of Dasein, the being whose being is in question, we have to see self-knowledge and knowledge of the world as inextricably bound up together. In order to do that, we are pursuing Corbin's central symbol, the angel, which of course is immediately off-putting to many people, including myself. But I've been trying to get away of articulating how Corbin is incorporating both Heidegger and Persian Sufism, Neoplatonic Sufism, into this understanding of the symbol. Okay. So is that enough to tee up
It's
dialogue
Yeah.
with 48?
What really got me excited about Corbin, which again I had never discovered or read, and I still haven't read original source material of Corbin, except through this chapter by Vervaeke. What excited me is that I'd grown up with Sufi poetry
Oh, interesting.
in Persian. My Persian is not the language Urdu, which is adjacent to Farsi. So a lot of Sufism. I read Rumi, by the way. If you have not read Rumi, I highly
I love
recommend.
Rumi.
I mean, I know his quotes, but I've never read them.
Just pick up any book called Rumi, and Rumi is. I'm pretty sure, Michael, that you would love it, and you can read it in
You
short doses.
will.
Don't you think
Every
so,
time
Cam?
I read his quotes, I just so incredibly evocative and wonderful.
So I think the spiritual tradition of the way he's harvesting the spiritual tradition of Sufi mysticism is very interesting because he's combining it with a Christian tradition of angels and all that stuff and crossing over. What appealed to me when I understood him was that in Sufi, as well as in some of the other mysticism of one branch of Sufi as it shows up in India, is this idea of beloved. And beloved is a capital B. Beloved is it's a proxy for God, right? And beloved, and when you listen to the poetry or much of the mystical writing, sounds like love poetry.
Yeah.
Like, a man adoring a woman or talking about how he can't live without her. But the words and the images are very down to earth and romantic in the highest spiritual way. But it is meant to be, and in many times is, literally a reference to God.
Yeah.
Right? So beloved is that. And they even have a fairly sophisticated way of explaining how you crave for beloved. That's a sense of longing for the spiritual connection. And they even have various levels at which you can be searching for beloved in your love. And then the final state is called fana. Fana means both merging as also annihilation.
What's the last part?
Annihilation.
What's that?
Annihilation. Complete. You cease to exist.
Oh, I see. Right. Annihilation. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, annihilation. Oh, yes. So that's
So it's a
the
very
annihilation
interesting
is the-
spiritual journey they talk about, and it's all search of the beloved, right?
Nice.
And many of the poetry, the songs, the Sufi songs, 80% of the Sufi songs, Qawwalis, if you haven't tried them, they are meant to put you in a set of trance that allows you to start getting in the being mode and experiencing even the whirling dervishes. All of that is designed to get you out of your head, the here and now, to get you closer to the spiritual connection of beloved.
Wow.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And Rumi's poetry, it looks like when you read it, it looks like it's a romantic poetry. But it's not like Shelley, Keats, or the romantic of the British Enlightenment, postmodern, or not modern, pre-modern, not just the Romantic era. It is spiritual.
Wow. That is thank you for sharing that. That's really, I mean, it really relates to what we're reading, right? I mean, it's really incredible.
In fact, final point I'll close out is that while we can talk about the Corbin, but final recommendation is that since I grew up with that sensibility of Sufi spirituality, I'm a Hindu household, but there's a branch of it that was influenced by Sufi, and I was personally influenced by Sufi poetry, and that's where I discovered all the spiritual aspect. For the last 20 years, I've been translating poems of a Punjabi poet in English, and I'll send you a link later. And all of that is spiritual poetry translated in English from Punjabi, and the poetry is very much like Rumi poetry. It's meant to get you to reflect on a state of, a spiritual quest.
Yeah. To bridge that gap for you, at least as
Yeah.
best it can, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Well, for me, it induces the yearning.
Because it helps you remember at least a little,
That's
right?
it.
And then you're
That
wanting
word you used is so important, Cam. Yearning.
yearning, yes.
That's really the spiritual impetus.
Well said, Cam. That was well said. Wow.
So
Yeah.
I'd like to back up a little bit. This is way less poetic and way
No,
less.
no, no. This was just my reaction. Please go ahead.
No, well, I love that. I didn't know that about you either, Anurag. That's fascinating to me that's right there in your makeup. Um,
It's one of the things that makes this dynamic so rich is that you come from a different culture and a different philosophical background, which we don't have any clue about, which is terrific. Really terrific.
And conversely, this is all new to me. I don't come from a Western philosophical or Christian background, so that's different. Yet here we are.
Well, how about here's another part of this chapter that I really just I was just so glad I learned this is that the linear narrative, that's the having mode, and then the vertical one, which is the being mode, but also the fact, he didn't say this in this course, but Peterson said they intersect. That's the cross, right?
yep.
And that's what it means. And I was like, oh God, no wonder people who actually get that look at that symbol, and that's what they're aiming at. They're trying to bring those two in balance, together, to instead of them being separate or distant. And then also the fact that he's talking about how Corbin is talking about symbols as a gateway between those two places. And I was like, God, man, that just evokes something in me. That's what I was
Yeah.
saying. It woke something up that I knew. This happened a lot with McGilchrist too when I read his book. I'm like, oh, I just know he's right. Like how do I know? I don't know how I know. It's like almost like a Christian would say faith. I don't know. I just know that's correct. And that's why I have been moved by certain pieces of art, literature, poetry, music, because it somehow it calls that to you. Like, you're being called to that place. And also the fact that he was saying how we have almost like an ideal self that exists that we're trying to evoke from this place. And I'm like, God, I can totally relate to that too. That there's something intuitive about that being correct. Almost like a true form in the Plato stuff, writings. And I'm like, so did you guys also catch that in the reading?
Yeah, and I'd love to try to tease it apart a little bit more. So a couple things. I hear that as the aspirational target.
Yes,
So
exactly.
there's I'm being drawn to something, and that also involves that um that's somehow related to that yearning that I was talking about before. So it's
Yeah.
not quite the same in that there's a sense that I can personally become, and then there's something that is affording that like that's the presence of God for me around. That's kind of the glow around it, so to speak. Um, so the page that I have up here is the little section on the narrative and the non-logical identity, and he talks about the identification with the child that was born on the eastern seaboard. He's talking about
Right.
himself, and he says and he makes the point like how different that person is from who it is that's speaking in the classroom that day, when he's presenting, and yet it's the same person. So the I kind of met my edge here. So that's the horizontal, as I understand it, Michael. Is that
Yeah,
how?
yep.
So that, but it's non-logical. Why is it non-logical?
I'm not sure I know. That's a good question. I don't know. Yeah, any clue, Andrew?
So my take is he's trying to, just like Heidegger, he's trying to create a different axis, right? He's saying
Mm-hmm.
yours. Uh, so two or three things that hit me, perhaps that'll resonate with Cam on your question, which is Corbin is saying, first of all, he does a flip that not even Heidegger does. What he says is that the real world is that one.
Mm-hmm.
And the mundane, the world we live in, is actually not the real world. If you think about it, that's a pretty bold flip.
Very.
Right. So he's no longer saying, oh, there's a ground of being and there is something mysterious. He's saying that's the real world. Right. And that world of spiritual reality is the ultimate world. The mundane world can aspire to connect and bond, and we live in both those worlds. We have a mundane reality and we have a divine double, the best of us, that's in the spiritual world, and that's the real potential of us.
Mm-hmm.
And symbols and our aspiration and yearning allow us to connect with and reach potentially our divine double. And basically, and that happens as we change inside, and that happens as we get closer and closer in resonance and light to the best of us, the
Yeah.
best version of ourselves. So he's basically flipping it, saying the spiritual world out there is the real world. Mundane world is where we are, and we have to connect to it. Imaginal is our way of having access to it through symbols and play. And as we get better and better at it, we connect with that best of our divine double, right? And that's both a search inside us to change ourselves, transformation, as well as a search outside through exploration. And he doesn't talk into details how you go about it, but he talks about, um, how you engage in the world in quest of that divine double. So it's very interesting. That's what I took away from how
That
he's talking about it.
That's what I read too. I mean, that's what I took away too. That was very well said. It
so
was
in
very evocative, that to me. I mean, it
in
just
yeah,
it called to me inside. It was like, yeah, I could sense like my ideal self is, and how there's that there's that tension between how far I am from it. And that's the longing, right? Is to be closer to
Exactly.
that being mode. Yeah.
so in listening to you, Anurag, what was occurring to me when you started to talk about this world not being the real world, it it sounded analogous to the example of the glasses that he uses several times, where
Yeah.
you're both looking through. How does he say that? So
The frame. He says, yeah, you can look at the frame or through the
you can
frame.
look at the frame and
Right.
you're looking through the frame.
Yeah.
So I started to think of this world the same way that he's talking about those lenses, the frame. So this world is the frame by which I perceive that transcendent, and I can look at this world. So I don't know if that resonates at all with you, but I hadn't until you spoke about it, I hadn't thought about it that way. But the world itself is becomes a lens then that can both be, it is what's affording the point of view that
Yeah.
gives the view to the transcendent, and I can naturalistically observe, perceive the world
I
itself.
would say that that description that you just gave, and Vervaeke gives it in one of his earlier lectures, is a scientific understanding of how we can potentially try to step out of our propositional beliefs when we are stuck in it.
Right.
Right? But I don't think, in my mind, I don't see that the same way as he's describing. He's describing that it's not a matter of changing the frame, because that is still an intellectual exercise. He's saying your full being at the participatory level, right? In the agent arena relationship, how you go about life, your full being is in search of elevating itself because there is something better than you currently as you exist. And that is the world that he's saying is a spiritual world. And for you to, and your full being today has a longing, right? So he's saying it's not an intellectual longing, it's not a pursuit, it's not curiosity, it is longing in the most visceral, full body sense. And that longing is what you are responding to. And that longing allows you to aspire to a better, higher version of a divine version of yourself. And that turns, in his mind, is the real thing, right? We are here limited beings in our current state, which is what makes it interesting.
Yep. Yeah, that's well said.
In Hindu philosophy, if you go to most of it, they flip the game even more so than Corbin, or even at the end of this course. There, the non-dualistic view of Hinduism, which I'm beginning to learn these days, Vedanta, is like the ground of reality is consciousness, and and everything else, including everything, is in literal, according to Vedanta, is an illusion, a projection. Basically what Corbin is trying to say, but it doesn't go as far.
That's an interesting, thing to ponder. I think that Miguel Christ doesn't agree with that.
He doesn't, because
No.
that's still, we will get into deep metaphysical discussions of different religions, but that's outside the scope of our conversation today.
Exactly, for now. But
Yeah.
I just remembered that he actually said there's a number of things he doesn't agree with. He doesn't think that you can go back in time, and he doesn't think things are determined. It's because you're co-creating as you go, and he doesn't think the idea that this world is an illusion, he thinks, is actually not true at all.
Yeah.
So
That's a lot of it, like the conversation on God, comes down to unpacking the concepts and definitions rather than the commonly understood versions of it.
But it's
Anyway,
an interesting thing to kind of sit with, part of it, what I like about the meditating on the fact that maybe this world's an illusion, is it's so hard to believe, and then it's hard to because there's all this proof all the time, right? But then people, I haven't done this myself, but people that take psychedelics say that proof tends to disappear during certain psychedelic experiences, or even mystical practices where you fast and blah 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 and stay awake for days and all that stuff. So anyway, that's
other reactions to Corbin, Cam?
So he comes back to the sense of sacredness. So now I'm looking at the section where he says Corbin's imaginal understanding of the symbol, which we've been talking about. But I'm reminded here where he says he picks up on the sense of sacredness on what within the imaginal. How does he say this? Here's where Corbin is different from Heidegger, where he really does pick up on the sense of sacredness that is going on within the imaginal. So the sacredness, can you guys help me understand
how that, could you read that again?
Yeah, maybe I'll provide a little more context here. Corbin's imaginal understanding of the symbol. Here's where Corbin is different from Heidegger, where he really does pick up on the sense of sacredness that is going on within the imaginal.
Yes. Okay, that's
Yeah.
and I think that's also what Jung also talked about too, if I'm not mistaken. By the way, I didn't realize that Jung and Corbin actually worked. They shared ideas a lot. They were heavily.
I didn't understand that either.
Yeah, I didn't know idea, but apparently they met often and they talked about the ideas and so on. But I don't think I explicitly know exactly what that means, but when I hear it, it makes sense.
So let me try maybe. So he goes on to basically say, so the imaginal understanding of the symbol as opposed to the imaginary understanding, the dismissive understanding of the symbol. So the dismissive one is that's more strictly a having. So it's an object, it's a thing, it's something that I can possess, and it's dismissive of the the relational nature of it. That it dismisses the effect that the symbol has on me, the transformative power of the symbol.
On your
I'm struggling a little bit, but that's what I think is,
Yeah.
to me, the intuition is what is meant by the sacred. It's the acknowledgement of the relationality there.
and there's I just remembered another thing that he said, which was fascinating. He says you should be able to see through the symbol to
Yeah.
the divine, or more or less. I don't know if that's the words,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
and that was just that really shook my world. I was like, I get that. That is crazy, but that because when you can't see through it, it's just an object, right? Or it's just a metaphor, which metaphors can be a bridge. I think that's what it means anyway. But this is beyond that. This is like you see, it's almost like it becomes transparent, and through it you see the higher realm.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that's just, and I think that's what really good art does.
Yeah.
Because that, you see through it into the higher realm as you observe or participate, I would say, in the art.
I took the imaginal to be kind of like how we met when we were doing Evolve, Move, Play, right? So you are in a place where, let's say you are going through, let's say we were doing role play around military exercises, right? It is more than simply an intellectual exercise. You're actually changing and thinking, just like children do the play around playing house, right? You
Yep.
are it's not just an intellectual exercise. It is an exercise in wanting to become that you are not yet.
And a practice of fitting too.
Right.
Mhm.
Whether you're playing house or
Fittedness.
you are training to be a soldier in a combat, you are going through certain set of physical and mental exercises to become that you're not yet, right? But that is imaginal. It is serious. It's real in a way that simply simulating it or simply putting a name as a game to it is not. And then in the act of doing that, and by continuing to doing that, you become closer and closer to a soldier or to a parent or whatever your role playing is. And that's the imaginal he's talking about. And he's then saying sometimes all of that can be symbolized. And that symbol is meaningfully different than just a sign and an object, right? And again, continuing with that metaphor, a symbol of a flag to a soldier is quite different, right, than just a piece of cloth with some colors on it, right? And that allows you to have access to all the things that open up beyond that symbol, behind that symbol, right? And I think somewhere else he talks about how symbols can be quite different. For example, he talks about a justice symbol, right? A lot of things that cannot be explained can be captured in a symbol, and that symbol evokes many, many, many things that a simple sign or a metaphor won't.
Yeah, he said it's a
Yeah.
concentrated, the symbol concentrates complex ideas that you're striving to become or follow.
Yes, yes,
And it evokes, because it's like a whole book or something
yes,
right here in this cross or whatever it is
yeah,
that your
yeah,
symbol, and then it kind of evokes that in you, that understanding of that longing, that or that goal
yeah.
of trying to go to that, to your higher self or whatever it is. Yeah, that's wow. That's
Wow, this is very powerful. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
absolutely,
Yeah.
you
Thank
guys.
you,
This is
Anurag.
Thank
really
you. And
uplifting.
any closing comments?
Just fantastic. this is what a journey. I mean, we're almost at the end of this part of the journey, but I'm so grateful that we've been able to climb this mountain together for over a year.
That's right. That's right.
Amazing, right?
Yeah, it is quite a journey.
Well, thank you so much for both of you. And we will continue very soon to our next session. Thank you. Good evening.
And I need to check in 2 weeks if I can do that evening. I may be teaching a class, but I'll double check. So go ahead and schedule and
Let me stop the recording and we'll continue with
Oh,
that.
sorry. Yeah.